You think that suit makes you invincible, boy? The officer's spit flew across the polished mahogany of the defense table, his face twisted in an ugly crimson mask of rage. His hand twitched toward his heavy duty belt. I'm going to teach you respect right here, right now. The gavel slammed like a gunshot echoing through the cavernous room. Bailiff, restrain that man, the judge roared. But Officer Vance had already lunged. He expected fear. He expected a victim. What the corrupt cop didn't know was that the quiet black man sitting in the defendant's chair wasn't just another civilian to be bullied. He was a Tier 1 operator. And in exactly 3 seconds, the predator was about to become the prey. The rain was coming down in sheets the night the trap was set. Daniel Briggs gripped the leather steering wheel of his restored 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle, the low rumble of the V8 engine a comforting vibration against the downpour. Daniel was a man who appreciated control and precision. For the past 12 years, his life had been defined by those 2 words. He was a chief petty officer in the United States Navy, specifically a member of SEAL Team 6. He had survived the grueling, soul-crushing sands of BUD/S, training at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California, enduring Hell Week, freezing surf torture, and sleep deprivation that broke 90% of the men who tried out. He had operated in the mountains of Afghanistan and the shadows of Syria. He knew what real danger felt like. He knew the scent of it. But tonight, driving through the affluent, dimly lit suburbs of Oak Ridge, the danger didn't come from insurgents or enemy combatants. It came wrapped in a badge and a uniform. The flashing red and blue lights pierced his rear-view mirror, blinding and sudden. Daniel sighed, his broad shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. He hadn't been speeding. His tags were up to date. His taillights were perfectly functional. He knew the drill. It was a phenomenon known all too well in this neighborhood, driving while black. He pulled over smoothly, turned off the engine, rolled down his window, and placed both large, calloused hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. It was a survival tactic, a de-escalation method he shouldn't have needed, but one he practiced religiously. Heavy boots crunched on the wet asphalt. Officer Thomas Vance approached the vehicle. Vance was a man built like a brick wall, with a thick neck, a shaved head, and a reputation in the precinct for being heavy-handed. He walked with a swagger that spoke of absolute, unquestioned authority, an authority he routinely abused. "License and registration," Vance barked over the sound of the rain, shining a heavy maglight directly into Daniel's eyes. "They're in my glove compartment, officer. I'm going to reach for them slowly now," Daniel replied, his voice a calm, deep baritone. It was the voice of a man who had called in airstrikes while under heavy machine gun fire. He was entirely unbothered by a local beat cop. Vance didn't like the tone. He didn't like the lack of fear. He was used to civilians trembling, apologizing, shrinking away from his imposing figure. "Did I say you could reach for anything? Keep your hands where I can see them." "I cannot give you my paperwork without reaching for it, officer," Daniel stated logically, his hands remaining perfectly still on the wheel. "Don't get smart with me, boy," Vance sneered, the derogatory term slipping out with practiced ease. "Step out of the vehicle, now." What followed was a masterclass in police misconduct. When Daniel stepped out, moving slowly and deliberately, Vance immediately escalated. He grabbed Daniel's arm, attempting to twist it behind his back in a painful compliance hold. Daniel, whose muscle memory was tuned to lethal hand-to-hand combat, instinctively tensed, his core turning to iron. He didn't fight back, but his sheer density made him immovable. "Stop resisting! Quit resisting!" Vance yelled, putting on a show for his dashcam. He slammed Daniel against the side of the Chevelle, denting the pristine classic metal. Vance then unclipped his heavy steel baton, striking Daniel hard in the back of the legs, forcing him to his knees in the puddles, before violently ratcheting handcuffs around his wrists. Daniel was booked on charges of resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, and obstruction of justice. Vance wrote a glowing creative report detailing how the suspect had taken a martial arts stance and threatened his life. It was a complete fabrication, a story designed to ruin a man's life just to stroke a fragile ego. But Vance had made a critical error. He didn't check Daniel's military background until after the arrest, and worse, he didn't know who Daniel was going to hire for his defense. Enter Nia Brooks. Nia was a legal apex predator. A former civil rights activist turned high-powered defense attorney, she specialized in tearing apart corrupt police narratives. With her sharp-tailored suits, piercing brown eyes, and a mind like a steel trap, she was the nightmare that kept dirty cops awake at night. When she read Daniel's file and sat across from the quietly intense Navy SEAL in the consultation room, she didn't just see a client. She saw the perfect weapon to dismantle a broken system. "He thinks he's buried you, Daniel," Nia had said, tapping a manicured fingernail against Vance's police report. "He thinks his badge is a shield against the truth." Daniel had simply looked at her, his expression utterly serene. "Then let's take his shield away, Nia." The air inside the Fulton County Courthouse was thick, smelling of old pine, floor wax, and nervous sweat. The courtroom was a grand, intimidating space with high vaulted ceilings and heavy oak paneling, designed to make every civilian feel small in the face of the law. But Daniel Briggs sat at the defense table as if he were waiting for a bus. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, his posture impeccably straight, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked like a CEO, or perhaps a visiting dignitary. He certainly didn't look like the deranged, violent thug Officer Vance had described in his police report. Beside him, Nia Brooks was organizing her legal pads. She moved with a kinetic energy, arranging her documents with surgical precision. Today was the second day of the trial, and the prosecution had just called their star witness to the stand, Officer Thomas Vance. Vance swaggered up to the witness box, his uniform pressed to a razor's edge, his brass polished and gleaming. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, adjusting the microphone with a beefy hand. He looked smug. He looked victorious. He had testified hundreds of times, expertly spinning narratives that judges and juries swallowed whole. He cast a contemptuous glare toward Daniel, silently communicating his dominance. Daniel simply blinked slowly, his face an unreadable mask. The prosecuting attorney, a tired-looking man named Henderson, began the direct examination. He lobbed soft, easy questions at Vance, allowing the officer to paint his masterpiece of fiction. "Officer Vance, can you describe the defendant's demeanor when you initiated the traffic stop?" Henderson asked. "He was immediately hostile, sir," Vance lied, his voice projecting a false tone of earnest civic duty. "He was verbally abusive. He refused to comply with basic lawful orders. When I asked him to step out of the vehicle, he lunged at me. He took what I immediately recognized as a highly aggressive, combative stance. I feared for my life and the safety of the public, which is why I had to deploy physical force to subdue him." The jury, a mix of local residents, scribbled notes. Some looked at Daniel with suspicion. The narrative was working. It was the classic script, executed flawlessly. Vance puffed out his chest, leaning back in the heavy wooden chair. He was untouchable. He was the law. But then, Henderson sat down, and it was time for cross-examination. "Your witness, Ms. Brooks," the judge, a stern woman named Honorable Patricia Davies, announced. Nia Brooks stood up slowly. She didn't rush. She buttoned the single button of her blazer, picked up a single sheet of paper, and walked toward the center of the courtroom. The click-clack of her heels on the hardwood floor was the only sound in the room. She stopped a few feet from the witness stand, letting the silence stretch out, forcing Vance to squirm under her unwavering gaze. "Officer Vance," Nia began, her voice soft but carrying perfectly to the back row of the gallery. "You stated that my client, Mr. Briggs, was immediately hostile. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am. He was belligerent," Vance replied, crossing his arms defensively. "And you also stated that you feared for your life." "Absolutely." The suspect is a large man. He was acting erratically. Nia began to pace slowly. Officer Vance, how long have you been on the force? 15 years. 15 years, Nia repeated, letting the number hang in the air. In those 15 years, you've received commendations, yes? But you've also received reprimands. Objection! Relevance! The prosecutor shouted, leaping to his feet. Goes to character and credibility, Your Honor. Nia countered smoothly without looking away from Vance. Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Brooks, the judge said. Isn't it true, Officer Vance, that you have 7 excessive force complaints on your record, 3 of which involved unarmed black men? Nia's voice rose slightly, the trap beginning to close. Vance's face flushed a dull red. Those were baseless complaints, cleared by internal affairs. Of course they were, Nia said dryly. She turned her back to him, walking toward Daniel. You painted a very vivid picture today, officer. You described a violent, out-of-control monster. But let's talk about the man sitting right there. Are you aware of what Mr. Briggs does for a living? Vance scoffed. He's unemployed, as far as I know. Nia smiled. It was a terrifying smile. No, Officer Vance. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Briggs is an active duty member of the United States Navy SEALs. He has completed 4 combat tours in the Middle East. He has been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. His psychological evaluations describe his temperament under extreme, life-threatening pressure as, and I quote the Department of Defense, exceptionally calm, calculated, and restrained. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury's eyes darted from Vance to Daniel, their perceptions radically shifting. Nia whipped back around, her voice cracking like a whip. So you want this jury to believe that a man trained to remain perfectly calm while being shot at by machine guns in an Afghan valley suddenly completely lost his mind and took a combative stance because you asked for his license and registration? Vance gripped the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. I don't care what kind of training he has. I know what I saw. He was resisting. He was resisting, Nia repeated softly. She walked back to her table and picked up a small black plastic rectangle, a flash drive. Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit C into evidence, and I would ask the court's permission to play it on the monitors. Vance's eyes locked onto the flash drive. A cold bead of sweat trickled down his spine. The game was changing, and he had no idea what she was holding. The courtroom held its collective breath as the bailiff took the flash drive from Nia Brooks and plugged it into the court's multimedia system. Large, flat-screen monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. Officer Vance shifted uncomfortably in his wooden chair. He had written the report. He had reviewed his dashcam footage before submitting it into evidence. The dashcam only showed the front of his cruiser. It captured Daniel being thrown against the car, but the audio was conveniently corrupted. A common technical glitch, Vance claimed, happened right as he stepped out of his vehicle. Without the audio, it was just his word against the defendants, and the word of a 15-year veteran always won, or so he thought. Officer Vance, Nia said, her eyes fixed on the screen. You testified under oath that your dashcam audio failed that night. You also testified that there were no other witnesses to this encounter, correct? That's correct, Vance said, his voice a little tighter than before. It was late. A dark, empty street. Empty, Nia echoed. Except for the house at 442 Elm Street, right across from where you initiated the stop. A house recently equipped with a high-definition, motion-activated audio recording security system. A system whose owner, a Mr. Arthur Pendleton, gladly turned over the footage to my investigators when we showed him your police report. Vance felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. His heart rate spiked, pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked desperately at the prosecutor, who looked equally blindsided and pale. Play the video, please, Nia instructed. The screen lit up. It was a wide-angle shot from a porch camera, looking directly out onto the rain-slicked street. The quality was crystal clear, a stark contrast to the grainy police dashcam. The timestamp matched the night of the arrest perfectly. The video showed Daniel's Chevelle pulling over smoothly. It showed Vance marching up to the window, and then the audio kicked in. It wasn't corrupted, it was horrifyingly clear. "License and registration," Vance's voice barked from the speakers. "They are in my glove compartment, officer. I'm going to reach for them slowly now," came Daniel's calm, measured response. "Did I say you could reach for anything? Keep your hands where I can see them." The courtroom listened in stunned silence as the entire exchange played out. They heard Daniel's polite compliance, and then they heard the slur. They heard Vance call him boy. They heard the unmistakable sound of Vance ripping the car door open and dragging a completely unresisting Daniel into the rain. "Stop resisting! Quit resisting!" Vance's voice screamed on the video. But the video clearly showed Daniel standing perfectly still, his hands visible, making absolutely no aggressive moves. It showed Vance unprovoked, grabbing Daniel, slamming him violently against the metal of the car, and then taking out his baton to strike the back of Daniel's knees. There was an audible gasp from the jury box. One of the jurors, an older woman, put her hand over her mouth. The judge's face had turned to stone, her eyes boring holes into the man sitting in the witness stand. Naya paused the video right on the frame where Vance had his baton raised, ready to strike a man who was already yielding. "Officer Vance," Naya said, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating. "Can you point out exactly where in this video the defendant takes a combative stance? Can you show the jury exactly where he lunges at you?" Vance was hyperventilating. His chest heaved beneath his pristine uniform. The arrogance that had cloaked him for 15 years had been stripped away in less than 3 minutes of high-definition truth. He was exposed as a liar, a brutalizer, and a racist. That video is taken out of context," Vance stammered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "Camera angles can be deceiving. He was flexing his muscles. He was resisting internally." A few people in the gallery actually laughed. It was a cold, mocking sound. Nia didn't laugh. She stepped closer to the stand, her eyes narrowing. "Resisting internally? Officer, you are under oath. You swore before God and this court to tell the truth. You filed a sworn police report that was a complete work of fiction designed to send an innocent war hero to state prison. You committed perjury today on that stand." "Objection. Badgering the witness," the prosecutor cried out, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. "I'll allow it," the judge snapped, leaning forward. "Answer the question, officer." "I didn't lie," Vance yelled, his temper finally beginning to fracture his panicked facade. His face was beet red, a vein pulsing dangerously in his thick neck. "He was a threat. You don't know what it's like out there on the streets. You don't know the animals we have to deal with." The word hung in the air. Animals. Naya simply turned and looked at the jury. She didn't need to say another word. Vance had just dug his own grave, climbed inside, and pulled the dirt down on top of himself. "No further questions, Your Honor," Naya said quietly, returning to her seat next to Daniel. Daniel had not moved a muscle during the entire exchange. He simply watched Vance, his dark eyes analyzing the cop not as a man, but as a compromised target. He could see the micro-expressions on Vance's face, the dilation of his pupils, the twitch in his jaw, the rapid, shallow breathing. Daniel knew exactly what was happening. Vance was entering the fight-or-flight response. His ego, entirely dependent on his authority and power, had been publicly shattered. And men like Vance, when cornered and humiliated, rarely chose flight. The courtroom was in a state of chaotic suspension. The judge hammered her gavel to silence the murmurs erupting from the gallery. "Order! Order in this court!" Judge Davies commanded. She turned her furious gaze toward the prosecution table. "Mr. Henderson, do you have redirect?" The prosecutor stood up, looking physically ill. He looked at the video still paused on the monitors, then looked at his star witness, who was currently sweating profusely and gripping the rail of the witness box like a drowning man holding onto debris. "No, Your Honor, the state has no further questions for this witness. Officer Vance, you are excused," the judge said coldly. "However, I am ordering you to remain in the courthouse. I will be speaking with the district attorney in my chambers regarding potential perjury and civil rights violations stemming from your testimony today." It was a death sentence for his career, delivered in a flat, judicial monotone. Vance was finished. His pension was gone. His badge was gone. He was likely facing federal prison time. Vance stood up. His legs felt like lead. The courtroom, previously his domain, felt like a cage closing in on him. He stepped down from the witness box. He was supposed to walk down the center aisle, push through the swinging wooden doors, and leave. But his mind was unspooling. The humiliation was a physical fire burning in his brain. He looked over at the defense table. Nia Brooks was organizing her notes, not even looking at him, dismissing him entirely. But Daniel Briggs was looking right at him. Daniel wasn't smirking. He wasn't gloating. He was just watching Vance with that same terrifying, calm detachment. It was the look a biologist gives an insect under a microscope. It was an utter lack of respect, a complete dismissal of Vance as a threat. In Vance's twisted, adrenaline-soaked brain, that look was the final trigger. This man, this boy, had destroyed his life. He had humiliated him in front of the city. He had stripped him of his armor. Vance's vision tunneled. The logical part of his brain, the part that knew he was in a courtroom surrounded by armed bailiffs and a judge, completely shut down. The primitive, violent part took the wheel. "You think this is funny?" Vance growled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He stopped his walk toward the exit and pivoted toward the defense table. "Officer Vance, keep walking," the bailiff warned, taking a step forward and resting his hand on his service weapon. Vance didn't hear him. The red mist had descended. "You think that suit makes you invincible, boy?" Vance spat, his voice rising to a roar. Saliva flew from his lips, landing on the polished mahogany of the defense table. His right hand dropped instinctively toward his heavy-duty belt, resting on the grip of his taser, his knuckles white. "I'm going to teach you respect right here, right now." "Bailiff, restrain that man," Judge Davies screamed, hammering her gavel frantically, but it was too late. Vance, fueled by rage and the terrifying realization that his life was over, launched himself across the short distance separating him from the defense table. He weighed 240 pounds, moving with the desperate speed of a wounded bull. His hands reached out, aiming to grab Daniel by the throat, to drag him over the table, to inflict as much pain as possible before they pulled him off. Nya screamed, pushing her chair back, but she was trapped between the table and the railing. Vance expected Daniel to cower. He expected him to freeze in terror, or perhaps throw up his hands in a clumsy, untrained defense. He expected a victim. But the man sitting in the chair was a ghost who walked through fire. To Officer Thomas Vance, the courtroom was a blur of motion and screaming voices. But to Chief Petty Officer Daniel Briggs, time seemed to dilate, slowing to a manageable, almost leisurely crawl. This was the environment he was forged in. Violence was a language he spoke fluently. As Vance lunged, his heavy boots scuffing the hardwood, Daniel didn't panic. He didn't even blink. His brain processed the threat vector, the weight distribution of the attacker, and the available environment in a fraction of a millisecond. Threat: unarmed, highly aggressive, overcommitted forward momentum. Objective: neutralize without lethal force, prevent collateral damage to civilian Nia. Daniel didn't stand up to meet the charge. That would require fighting Vance's momentum. Instead, he used it against him. As Vance's thick, meaty hands reached for his neck, Daniel finally moved. It wasn't a wild punch or a brawl. It was water flowing around a rock. Daniel shifted his torso sharply to the left, slipping seamlessly inside Vance's wide, clumsy reach. Simultaneously, Daniel's right hand shot up, his palm striking the outside of Vance's right elbow. It wasn't a strike meant to break bone, but a precise parry that pushed Vance's arm across his own chest, further unbalancing the heavy cop. Vance, expecting to hit a solid body, suddenly found himself grasping empty air. His forward momentum carried him off balance, his chest slamming hard into the edge of the mahogany defense table. The breath left his lungs in a ragged oof, but Daniel wasn't finished. The counterattack took less than a second and a half. As Vance bounced off the table, disoriented and gasping, Daniel flowed upward from his chair. He was taller than Vance, and beneath the tailored suit, his muscles were coiled steel wire. With terrifying grace, Daniel stepped behind Vance. His left arm snaked around Vance's thick neck, not grabbing the throat, but securing the shoulder and collarbone. At the exact same moment, Daniel's right hand gripped Vance's right wrist. This was standard CQC, close quarters combat. It was a joint manipulation technique designed to control an enemy combatant instantly. Daniel stepped his right leg behind Vance's knee and twisted his hips, applying intense, localized pressure to Vance's shoulder joint, while simultaneously breaking his center of gravity. To the onlookers in the courtroom, it looked like magic. 1 second, a massive, raging police officer was flying over the table to kill the defendant. The very next second, the officer was violently yanked backward, spiraling through the air. Crack! Vance hit the hardwood floor of the courtroom with bone-jarring force. The impact echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Before the cop could even register the pain of the fall, Daniel dropped a knee directly onto the center of Vance's spine. Not enough to break it, but enough to pin him to the floor with an immovable 210 pounds of dense muscle. Daniel pulled Vance's right arm up behind his back at an agonizing, unnatural angle. He applied just enough pressure to ensure that if Vance moved an inch, his shoulder would dislocate from the socket. The entire sequence, from Vance's initial leap to him being face down on the floor, took exactly 3 seconds. The courtroom was entirely silent, save for the sound of Vance's wet, ragged groans of pain. 2 bailiffs, who had drawn their weapons, stood frozen halfway across the room. They didn't know what to do. The threat had been neutralized so quickly, so efficiently, that they hadn't even had time to aim. Daniel didn't look angry. His breathing was perfectly even. He didn't even have a bead of sweat on his forehead. He looked up at the bailiffs, his voice as calm as it had been during the traffic stop. "The suspect is secured," Daniel announced, his tone professional, almost bored. He looked over his shoulder at the judge, who was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. "Your Honor, I believe he was attempting to assault me. I've neutralized the threat." Daniel Briggs, the man accused of being a violent, resisting thug, had just flawlessly subdued a raging police officer without throwing a single punch, without shouting a single curse word, and without a hair on his head falling out of place. Vance, pinned to the floor, his face pressed into the dusty wood, felt a pain in his shoulder that paled in comparison to the agonizing, crushing weight of his absolute humiliation. He whimpered, a pathetic sound escaping his lips. He was the one in the dirt now. He was the one helpless. The predator was on the floor. The aftermath of the courtroom incident was a swift, brutal tidal wave of justice that the city of Oak Ridge had rarely seen. The universe, it seemed, had finally balanced the scales, and karma hit Officer Thomas Vance with the force of a freight train. First came the immediate fallout. The bailiffs stepped in to handcuff Vance, taking him from Daniel's iron grip. As they hauled the disgraced officer to his feet, his shoulder protesting in agony, the judge looked down from her bench with a mixture of disgust and righteous fury. "Thomas Vance," Judge Davies declared, her voice ringing out like a bell of doom. "You are under arrest for contempt of court, perjury, and attempted assault in the 1st degree. Bailiff, remove him from my sight." Vance was frog-marched out of the courtroom, not through the back doors like a free man, but through the side door leading directly to the courthouse holding cells. The same cells he had smugly sent countless innocent people to over his 15-year career. Within 48 hours, the video from the courtroom, combined with the porch camera footage of the initial traffic stop, was leaked to the press. It became a national news sensation. The headline read, "Corrupt cop attacks Navy SEAL in court, gets dismantled in seconds." The internet feasted on the footage of Vance's pathetic charge, and Daniel's flawless surgical takedown. The police department, desperate to save face amidst a catastrophic public relations nightmare, fired Vance immediately. There was no paid administrative leave. There was no union protection that could save him from the undeniable video evidence of him committing perjury and assault. But losing his badge was just the beginning of his descent. Because of Nia Brooks's relentless legal maneuvering, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Division opened a massive probe into Vance's history. Empowered by his sudden downfall, dozens of past victims came forward. The baseless, excessive force complaints that had been swept under the rug by internal affairs were reopened. The district attorney, sensing the political winds, threw the book at him. Vance was indicted on multiple federal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault, and falsifying official documents. 6 months later, Vance stood in a different courtroom, this time wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a pressed uniform. He looked hollowed out, older, his posture stooped. He pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial he knew he would lose. The federal judge showed no mercy, sentencing him to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, a harsh sentence for a former cop, meaning he would likely spend it in protective custody, locked in a small cell for 23 hours a day. As for Daniel Briggs, his charges were dismissed with prejudice the very day of the courtroom assault. The city, terrified of a massive civil rights lawsuit orchestrated by the terrifyingly competent Nia Brooks, offered Daniel a 7-figure settlement out of court. Daniel took the money, not for himself, but to fund a legal defense clinic that Nia Brooks was opening in the heart of Oak Ridge, designed specifically to provide free legal counsel to marginalized citizens targeted by police harassment. On a bright, clear Tuesday morning, Daniel stood outside the newly minted Brooks Legal Defense Foundation building. He was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, his restored Chevelle parked out front, completely repaired from the dents Vance had put in it. Nia walked out, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel and smiled. "Not bad for a guy who was looking at 5 years in state prison, huh?" Daniel took a sip of the coffee, looking out over the city street. The sun was shining. The air was clear. He felt the familiar, comforting weight of his own sovereignty. "The system is broken, Nia," Daniel said quietly, his deep voice carrying on the morning breeze. "But every now and then, when you apply the right amount of pressure to the right pressure point..." Nia grinned, remembering the sight of Vance flying over the courtroom table. "It snaps right into place," Daniel nodded, taking another sip of coffee. He was a warrior, a SEAL, a survivor. And he had proven, unequivocally, that true strength didn't need a badge to command respect. It just required the quiet, absolute confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. Wow, talk about instant karma. Officer Vance thought his badge gave him the right to bully anyone he wanted, but he chose the absolute worst target in Navy SEAL Daniel Briggs. It just goes to show that the truth always comes out, and true strength isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It's about staying calm, calculated, and letting justice serve the ultimate takedown. If you loved this story of hard karma hitting back and seeing a corrupt bully get exactly what he deserved, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a good justice-served story, and make